All right, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington. I serve and work with entrepreneurs around the world. I am super excited about our guest today. This is going to be a fascinating topic. It's one that I care a lot about. So I was thrilled when Karen and I connected through LinkedIn. And Karen, tell me how to say your last name.
McNamara.
McNamara. I'm so glad I asked. I should have asked you before we got started. Welcome to Karen McNamara. She and I recently connected via LinkedIn, and I was so excited to learn about her work because it is relevant to all of us, and particularly in the entrepreneurial small business world as we're building teams, as we are having to figure out our marketing messages and attracting the right clients and working with people across a wide range of ages. Many of us do. This conversation comes into play for all of us. And so, Karen, welcome. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, for listeners, let me quickly introduce Karen. So, Karen McNamara, and I feel like I said it wrong. McNamara, is that
McNamara.
right? Okay,
Yes.
so our editor will take care of this. So, Karen McNamara is a leadership and generational communication expert. She is one of the founders of Click Consultants, which utilizes a multi-generational training team to provide customized keynotes and workshops to develop leaders, enhance generational communication, build teams, increase retention, resilience, and create classrooms that increase learning time. I love that, and I can't wait to dig into this because it has so many applications. Examples of her workshops include develop leaders novice to expert, build high performance and diverse teams, communicate with and connect different generations, support change resilience, and teach classroom strategies to regain teaching time and decrease office referrals. Karen, I know you also have in your background, you're a motivational, inspiring, and captivating presenter. You do a lot of presenting. She also uses the power of story for learning. She's a recognized expert on leadership development and generational communication strategies. She's presented on stages in conferences, organizations, academic and nonprofit settings, both stateside and overseas. So whether coaching one-to-one, speaking virtually or on stage, and a lot of virtual right now, I assume, her strategies have immediate application, make ideas and goals click, and customers succeed. Her 30 plus years of connecting people will have you laughing, learning, and communicating for success. Karen, I love that. I am just so enamored with your work. I feel like it's really, really important. So I'm super happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So talk to me, take the listeners back to how you got started down this path of not only leadership development, but specifically your focus on multi-generational communication and multi-generational communication strategies.
Thank you. Yes, it actually goes back to about 2010
Okay.
when my son and I were both in Toastmasters together.
Mm,
And I was working in leadership development and he was working on his MBA. So he was intrigued by my leadership courses and noticed I did one on generations. So he said, how about if I take a look at that? I said, go for it. I'm a boomer, he's a millennial. I
mm,
thought, this will be interesting. Well, he came back and said, oh, Ma, you got to put some technology in there. So I let him at it. And then he came back and said, why don't we do it together?
I
So we
love that.
started doing it together.
I
And of
love
course, doing
that.
it for a Toastmasters group, they give you lots of feedback. So
Yeah.
we were able to tweak it and play with it. And pretty soon people started saying, hey, can you come talk to us about this? Can you do a workshop on this? And we started doing that.
Mm,
So then my son comes back and he says, we got to make a business out of this. So we did. In 2011, we started up an LLC called Click Consultants, where we make things click.
I love that.
And we started speaking for all different types of groups about communication.
Mm.
And generational communication was one of the key areas that got a lot of interest and to this day still does.
Yeah, well, the part that I love is how that develops so organically. I mean, I love the piece about your son looking at it and getting it and going, this is important, right? And then, of course, as a mom to a son myself, he's quite a bit younger, but just the idea that your son wanted to work with you and saw the value in some of the training that you'd already put together. I mean, it's just so heartwarming to hear that. And then, for anybody out there who has led teams, who's worked on teams, like probably all of us have experienced firsthand the challenges that can come up if people don't understand this area, right? This generational communication issue. So talk to us a little bit about how that evolved and how did you initially become an expert on that topic?
Well, once I started a leadership development program many years ago, I learned that there were different groups and different dynamics, and I started getting training in each of those different areas and
Mm,
realized that one of the key focuses was the different generations.
shoot. Looks like we froze. Hmm. You there, Karen? Gonna stop the video. Let's see. Darn it. Okay. um, okay, we're back. So our editor will take care of this. So, and for anybody that has worked on a team that's multi-generational, I think problems become really, really clear when this piece of, the information that we need to lead teams, to be on a successful team is missing. Where do you see in your experience, where do you see most people going awry, or especially leadership? Because when we're talking about leading and managing a team, I assume that a lot of the tone and the communication is top down. Where do you see people struggling with the multi-generational communication?
I think what happens is that people know their own generation, they know what they have experienced, so they tend to look at everything through their own eyes and not through the eyes of different generations.
Mm,
Uniquely to today, we actually have 5 generations that are working, often even living or connecting with each other, even volunteering.
yeah,
That's never happened before.
that's amazing.
And what happens is you learn or you communicate or you understand the world through the ideas of what's happened around you.
Mm,
Of course, family, genetics, heritage play a role. But what we've learned is that what happens around us forms our way of looking at the world even more than our family.
Mm.
So our formative years are between about 8 and 18. So if you look at what was going on in the world during that time frame, that's why you look at the world differently than someone that was between 8 and 18 of a different generation.
Mm.
So when we look at the world, like for example, I'm a boomer. So I look at the world through a boomer's eyes. If you think about what was going on in my generation, we had just come out of war. It was a tough time. There had been depression and strife, and now the economy was booming. The first person went on the moon. It was exciting. It was a world of opportunity. It was called then the baby boomers for a reason. All kinds of babies were born, and we wanted the best for our families. So I look at the world that way, and it's all about making things good for the company and for the organization. Now you get someone else that comes in later. For example, one of the big shifts was Generation X that came after that was about 1960 to 1980s when they were born.
Yep.
And what happens is that was the time when both parents started working and the kids were now home by themselves. The latchkey kids,
Yes, my husband is one of those.
yes,
Mm.
on the computer,
Mm-hmm.
learning the computer, learning the value of family and the importance of doing for your family. And all of a sudden they started saying, wait a minute, why do we have to do things this way? So when they went into an interview, they'd say, well, I'd like to work this shift or these hours or these days because I want to take my kids here or there. And me as a Burman, excuse me?
Right.
Wait just a minute. You have to earn your way. This is all about the company, not about you. You're interviewing. I didn't get it. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what their perspective was, what was going on in their world. They were seeing a very different time.
Yep.
And remember, that's when technology exploded. So they needed to use different strategies and they wanted to know why. Why should I do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Not because you told me so.
Right. They're just not going to buy into the status quo.
Exactly. And that was really hard for boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the top down and I'm looking at this employee and I'm saying, no, it doesn't work that way. You've got to pay your dues. If I tell you this, you do it for
Yes.
me. It's not about you
Yes.
telling me what you need. Very different shift. So when you ask the question about why are there challenges, it's usually because they're not viewing things through the eyes of the other generation.
Well, and
So that's step
yes,
one.
I know, and I so appreciate all that context. I remember when you and I first connected and we spoke, and I was fascinated when you brought up this topic of multi-generational communication and leadership development around that, because one of the things that I see happening in the world, and especially in the conversations around business, is people expressing a lot of irritation about millennials, or what I mean, some of these young kids that again are not putting in the dues and all of this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
And I'm really fascinated about what they're doing right and what they're doing differently, even culturally, right? And I think our young people are brilliant. Obviously I'm a mom of two small children, so there's several generations of kids that I am just so happy are coming up and are going to change the world in the way that they will change the world. And so, when you and I were talking and we talked about some of the stuff that gets floated out there about millennials, let's take up that topic. How are millennials currently being misunderstood? Because I feel like this is a hot button in the, in the stratosphere, the things that people communicate about. You see a lot of stuff flying around about millennials, and I think a lot of it is wrong.
I think you're exactly right that it is wrong, that it is a perspective that's not really true about the millennial generation because we're not looking at it through their eyes. Now, if you take, for example, both of my kids are millennials,
Hmm.
and they're very different. They're about as different as night and day. But they shared common experiences, so they share things about the world that are united. For example, they are the first generation that really started caring about their community events, and giving back. They want to support their community. They want to support causes. And if you've got a cause that they are for, you cannot stop them.
Yes.
And yet you hear the comment, they're lazy, they don't care, they feel entitled, they want everything. So what happens is, it's because they're thinking, they're coming in with the big head and they're saying, I want, and they feel like, gosh, everything is all about me. Well, think again, when I was bringing up my kids, what did we do? We started taking them to all these sports. We started showing them all the things. They had all of this stuff, but they started getting exposed to some bad things, Columbine. They had some world and some drugs earlier than what we saw. And it was a little different world than what we experienced. So they look at it a little differently, and they look at how they can communicate, but they feel they've got the answers. They just went to school, they're coming into the workforce. My son, and this is a true story, thought that day 2 of going to his first job, he could become CEO. Because he had all the schooling, he knew the topics, he knew everything that was going on, and he'd tell you the same story because he had the technology, the experience, he had everything. So he walked in with that attitude. Who was his boss? A boomer.
Yeah.
And his boss said, oh, that's right, you're coming today. Oh, why don't you go read these manuals while I find a place for you? Well, you can imagine how that went over. And he had to essentially earn his way and understand the boss's perspective in order for him then to fit in. So his boss said, okay, talk to me. Why is it so hard for us to retain millennials? Why is it so hard for us to keep you folks around?
Yep.
And my son said, you really want to know? He said, I do. He said, okay, here's what you do. You talk to us and you listen to us. We have ideas. They may sound wild, but hear us out. Try some different things. He said, I recommend you, on the company's dime, connect every person, every millennial, with someone else in the company that they don't know, pay for their lunch, and let them just get to know each other. They will learn from each other. And he said, let me tell you something else. I will tell you that I know everything, but the reality is I don't. So what I need is a mentor. I need someone that has the experience. I have the knowledge of the latest, but I don't have the experience.
Right.
So help me with that. You connect me with a mentor. You give me opportunities. And oh, by the way, I need a better computer.
Right.
Because this one's not going to cut it. You use it for email. I use it for design. They're different. So all of a sudden, the communication started. The CEO had monthly meetings with the millennials. He let them try things. They set up the luncheons. They set up these different charrettes. All of it worked very, very well. And the millennials stayed.
Right. Yes.
And the other thing that my son will tell you is, he said, as a millennial, yeah, I come across as being entitled. We said everybody gets a trophy growing up because, you know, even if you worked hard, you get a trophy. Even if you got an F, you know, you worked hard, so we got to give you something. Whereas my generation, no way. So they come across. So another strategy with this age, give them feedback.
Yes. Acknowledge
Just say,
them.
hey, you're doing a great job.
Yes.
You're doing a great job. That'll get them going.
Well, and who doesn't need feedback, right?
Exactly.
I think prior generations probably didn't feel that they could ask for it, and this is one of the things that I actually love about our young people and even my children, right? At teeny tiny little ages, I feel like, you know, our younger generations, almost have democracy like born into them. They understand that democracy is really the way that we should all operate, that they should have a voice at the table too. And I believe they should, for the very reasons you're saying. The ideas that they bring, right? The technology experience that they bring, like they bring a lot of strengths to the table that, the rest of us can benefit from. We need to acknowledge that.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the newest generation coming up, the Generation Z, or Generation I for internet, the ones that were born after 2000. What's really fascinating is what's going on in the world today is very similar to what was going on with the veterans.
Mm.
So there's a unique bond between those two generations because they're exposed to the same things. They're exposed to war, to violence, to uncertainty, to dangers, to things that the other generations didn't experience in such a degree. So there's this common bond. The difference is technology. The technology is the difference, but you can connect those two generations and have absolutely phenomenal things go on. The folks in the veterans generation can tell stories to the new generation, to their grandkids, to their great grandkids about what they did during the flu epidemic.
Right.
They can tell you what happened after war and how they got through it.
Yeah.
How they bonded and what an amazing time it was.
Yes.
People say, oh, you went through the war. They said, I don't remember it that way. I remember at a time of bringing family together. I remember at a time when we ate together, we played together because we had to stick together. Doesn't that sound like COVID-19?
Right. Yes.
When you think about it, there's these bonds. So when you connect your generations well, you can build teams that are so dynamic. You give a Generation X the tools they need, they can run with it. Look at the entrepreneurs in that generation, because they were on their own and they said, we don't need someone to tell me what to do.
Yes.
It's a different thing than when you were in the boomers and it was all about the company.
Yes.
So if we understand that, we do really well. And it's pretty exciting to see.
It is. Well, it is exciting. And even the sense of independence that comes with, it's interesting because you hear people say how our children nowadays are not independent, right? They're not like, I think of when I grew up, and I was a Generation X person. I was at the tail end of that. But I was one of 6 kids. Like, I feel like we had virtually no oversight. We ran around. I mean, my mom was home. She wasn't working out of the house, but she was so busy. Her hands were full at all times. We literally, like, my memories of childhood are of my siblings, not really of my parents. Right? And so we lived outside, we lived in the fields, we lived doing, climbing trees and doing whatever, but it was a different time, and yet the young people today have a sense of independence about what they're capable of, and especially venturing into technology and the online space and entrepreneurial things that didn't really exist when I was a kid, right? And even though in the 90s, like, we went online, some of that started to develop, is very different, very, very different. And the part that you said that I particularly love about your kids, right? Generation Y, I think,
Yes.
right, is that they have a strong sense of community. Right? It gave me goosebumps, like this desire, like they might show up appearing entitled, but what I also know, which I think in a beautiful way really makes us reconsider what leadership means. If you pay attention to their hearts and you get buy-in on what causes they're committed to and the mission of your business, the mission of your company, you can have somebody that's committed to the work. You can have somebody that's committed to team. And like, why shouldn't we have been we should have been doing that all along, right? It's not, I don't feel like it's a stretch to be doing these things. Like, this is what we should be doing.
And we learn from each other.
Yeah.
As we open up and communicate and find out how we can best communicate. then we can just the sky's the limit. Nothing really matters,
Uh-huh.
but you do have to figure out how to communicate, because you communicate to a veteran and a boomer and a Generation X, a Generation Y, and a Generation Z differently. And you need to just talk to them and say, how do you want to connect? If we're
Yes.
setting up a Zoom, or we're setting up a meeting, or we're setting up a team, you need to talk to the different people and say, how are we going to connect? Is it going to be by phone? Is it going to be by email? Is it going to be by text? Is it going to
Mm-hmm.
be handwritten notes? Are we going to meet together one-on-one, or a combination thereof?
Yeah.
Because you can think, oh my gosh, I am communicating like crazy and I'm sending all these emails, and you're sending them all to a Generation Z, and they're like, I don't use email. I use text. Why would I use email? And then you have to understand how you're going to connect. And you may have to compromise a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and learn from each other that, you know what, this works really well because now we can document this, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, right, or my mother, to her grandkids and her great grandkids, taught them the value of writing, because they're using only technology. That's all they know. And she used only handwritten notes.
Right.
So she said, you want to make an impact? You want to get that interview? Here's what you do. You write them a letter. I'm not talking an email. I'm talking a handwritten letter, and you thank them for that time. You are going to stand out,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll get the job where they won't, because you've now connected to a different generation.
Mm.
How
Yes.
beautiful is that? The bond that happens when you connect those generations, the different generations, will go beyond anything else, and you'll get new ideas. Your teams will be stronger, your individuals will be stronger, and you learn every single time.
Well, and this idea that it just takes being a little bit more thoughtful. It's a little, I mean, for any of us who are married or who have been married, right? And I've used this as an example before, like we all have our own love language, but it does really no good to talk to somebody else in your love language if it's not theirs, right? And the thing that we need to care the most about is how the message is received. Is it received? Is it received in a way that is meaningful for that person, right? A little bit the same in work. Is the communication received in a way that's going to optimize their performance, optimize their contribution to the team, make them feel valued, right? How do we do that?
Heather, I absolutely love that analogy of the love languages, because the whole idea there is not to speak in your own love language, but to
Right.
speak in theirs. And that's where it all begins. And then you can partner for just amazing things and learn from each other.
Yes.
I mean, for example, my mother was not, who's 93 today and very healthy and independent. And
Mm,
she was not real interested in the computer.
yeah.
And my son said, Gma, I think you'd like Facebook and you'd like the computer. And she said, I'm not interested at all. He said, let me show you something. So he pulls up a picture on Facebook of her grandkids who are in another state.
Mm.
And she's like, wait a minute, I can see this. Wait a minute, how do you, give me an
Yes.
account. I want one right now. So we set it up. And then she got on the phone and got on the computer and just said, this is so cool. And she's got all her pictures of her kids, and she got them to set it up where they can move and change. And she said, this is so exciting. She says, well, what about email? Can I do stuff with that too? He said, sure. He said, you can send an email to anyone you want. She said, you can? He said, sure, if you've got their address. So what does she do? She writes the president every single day. She wants him to
I
know what
love
he
your
feels.
mom. I love your mom. That's amazing. But it's, the point is not lost that when we take the time to slow down and bridge that gap, there can be ways that we all get to use a certain tool for communication or that benefit relationships, whether at work, whether in our personal life. It brings up a funny story. So years ago, I used to go visit my grandma on spring break, and same thing, this technology gap where she didn't know how to use a computer. I wanted her to be able to get on email or do whatever she wanted because she had, grandkids all over the place. And so I said, well, and I knew she loved cards. She's a card player and had been her whole life, right? So I said, well, do you want to learn solitaire on the computer? Like, this will teach you the mouse, it will teach you scrolling and clicking, right? So that's what I started with. We got her started on solitaire, and I had a week with her and I taught her how to play solitaire. And it was hilarious because she had jumpy legs at night. And so I'd hear noises in the night, and I'd get up and peek out of the guest bedroom, and she'd be over there. I could see her in the middle of the night playing solitaire on the computer, click, click, moving the cards around. But she learned it. And it was so fun to see, like, okay, she was willing to, because I started in a way that felt comfortable for her. But it's so fun, and then it just goes from there. I think, especially with technology, it's that fear of just getting over the hump of, can I do it? Can I learn it? But I'm sure there's the reverse of that, right? For some of the younger generations, they're thinking, a little bit like your son so willingly addressed, like, what don't I know? Will you mentor me around things that I don't know, right? Because they may come with all the technology skills, but that openness is really wonderful.
It truly is. And it works, like you say, in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was teaching nurses on how to chart and do different things when they were oriented. And when we switched to electronic charting,
Yes.
that was a huge challenge for me because I had to understand how it was going and how it was working. And I'd be glued to teaching it. And then all of a sudden I'd look out at my audience, who are now all millennials, and they're like asleep.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I'm going too slow, aren't I? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, let's change the strategy a little bit. How about if I throw out a question and you tell me how to do it? And I would say, okay, we want to find this in a chart. How would we do it? Well, all of a sudden they're all engaged and they taught me, and I was able to teach them, and it worked out really well. So that shift and connecting the millennial with me to show me how to do it was a really positive thing. So when we would orient new people, we would always connect a millennial and a boomer, or an X and a boomer, to teach the new technology, because to them it was intuitive.
Yeah. Well, I love that very intentional connecting as well. You mentioned the program that your son recommended, right, to the CEO of his company about setting, the newer employees up with somebody who'd been more established and having them have connection conversations. I went to a legal event online a week or two ago, and same thing. It was an all women owned law firm. All women worked there, which is just how it worked out. But they would do the same thing. They would set up basically lunch dates within the company so that people, including staff, could get to know each of the attorneys, even the attorneys that they didn't work with, and really create those connections and those bonds. And I feel like just humanizing that process so that people have a desire. I mean, from my perspective, what that would do is increase the desire and willingness for people to figure out, okay, how do I best communicate? How do I continue to bond with so-and-so or colleagues of so-and-so so that we can all get along and work well together? Incentivizes them to really be committed to that process,
It was like my son had three very distinct mentors, one for his work as an architect, one for his speaking, and one for his faith. And he met with each one of them once a month.
Yeah.
They'd just go out to lunch, have coffee or whatever. And he could hardly wait for those meetings. And both came back totally energized because they learned from each other.
Yes.
And it was just such an enriching opportunity for both.
Yeah, I love that. So and I'm sure you've seen, because my next question is, where have you seen, and maybe you haven't, because I imagine you teach it in such a way that people feel open to the message, but do you see in certain organizations people at the top being closed off to this topic and just wanting to keep doing things their way and not have to make adjustments for newer, younger members of the team? What do you see in the landscape?
I see a little bit of everything,
Mm-hmm.
from totally open, help me make this work, to
Yes.
they just got to get over it and do what I tell them to do.
Right.
That's
Get in shape and just get like,
it. I'm the boss. They've got to learn. That's just the way it
yes.
is. That's business. That's what life is about.
Mm.
So what I do when I talk with them is I say, well, let's just talk a little bit about the perspective of where they're coming from and what happened in the world as they grew up. And I'll tell them that may sound strange, but it'll help you understand why they're reacting the way they are. They don't see themselves as disrespectful.
Mm-mm.
They see themselves as asking an important question. And if you understand why they're seeing that and that they're just looking at opportunity and ways to make it better. I mean, my son came into work with 10 ways that the company could improve on day one. And he looked, because he researched the company, he researched what they were
Yes.
doing. He thought, oh, this could be better. Well, that's not necessarily well received by
Yeah.
someone that's been in the business for a lot of years. So you have to learn that, oh, maybe I don't know everything, and be open on both sides. So I do find that once you start having those conversations and you start saying, I bet if you did this, they would react this way.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, why? And I said, here's why. And all of a sudden, there's the light bulbs that go off.
1 second. I'm going to pause just for a second. So we've talked a little bit about the dynamics of multi-generational, communication and the importance of learning the differences between the generations, in the context of a workplace. Talk to me a little bit about what businesses need to learn when it comes to marketing and attracting clients of multiple generations, right? And especially now that we have some of the younger generations coming on board as consumers in the marketplace now. What, again, back to the question of what are companies and organizations doing wrong, and how do you help them improve it when we're talking about communicating with the marketplace?
Great question. I think as entrepreneurs and small businesses and even large businesses, we need to be aware of how we're reaching out and
Mm-hmm.
how we're communicating. And with your different generations, you have to be aware of that. When you're talking to the millennial or the generation X, or even the new generation Y or Z coming up,
Mm-hmm.
you need to use technology as you're reaching out. You need to have your product something they can pull up online and look at, something that they can see, something that they will know there's been research, and they can do research because they will. And what's interesting is even the baby boomers who didn't use the technology will now research. They will go, like I will go to any company I'm going into and I will research.
Mm-hmm.
I will look to see who's the competition, who's been working well. So you need to have a place in social media, online. You need to have resources that compare and share your successes. For the boomers, you need to have data. They
Mm-hmm.
want to see data. For the Generation X, they also want to see different ways of doing things because that's what they look at. So you want to have technology, number one. That's part of the world today, and that needs to be part of selling or reaching out about your company. Then in addition to that, you want to think about who's your audience and what are they most concerned about right now. So if I'm working with Generation X and they've got little kids at home, okay, I'm going to start talking about their kids, their family, their homeschooling, the new environment, and I'm going to make the connection. It's all about relationship when you're selling and you're trying to build your company. So don't rush in to give the big sale. Everybody can pick up on that right away. Develop a relationship. That's true of all generations, but how you approach will vary.
Yes.
So have your company available for people to look at. Tell them this is how you can get more information. This is what you can do. But then talk about, what's your biggest issue? What do you have? Oh gosh, it's got to be hard now that you're home with kids and you've got to homeschool and you might get interrupted. Your kids might come into the room when you're in the middle of something. That can happen. And that's the reality. And you start talking and right away you've got a connection.
Yes.
So you work on the connections with people and find out what's their issue. With a boomer, you're going to say, okay, you're CEO. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah.
What is your biggest concern? If I did nothing else, what could I give you that would be the most helpful? And then if I can't provide that, I tell them right up front, you know what? That's not my area, but I know someone who can. I've got a link for you that'll know exactly how to help you with that challenge. And I do that. And now I've got a relationship.
Yeah.
I've got a client for the future. So it's selling in that way as well. So it's about relationship and understanding their perspective from the generations, making that connection and making sure that you use technology.
No, I love that. I love the piece about it's where you show up, right? What platforms you're using, what media you're using, like how the message gets to them, as well as what's in the message, right? Who are you talking to? How do you coach clients that are talking to multiple generations, right? Are they just using different platforms? Are they just sending different messages out using the same platforms? How do you coach those clients? Because many of us have clients in multiple generations.
First thing I tell them is congratulations. You are doing something that many people don't. You have multiple generations, and that's the most effective way to build a powerful team and leapfrog ahead of others in your company. What you want to make sure is that the way you combine those multi-generational teams is the best way. So you want to know if you need someone with technology on your team, make sure you've got a generation Y or Z. If you need someone that can problem solve and look at the big picture, you better bring a boomer in because that's all they love is the big picture and the scope of things. So you want to make sure that your team is combined the right way. Don't worry about fixing or making people better or working on their challenges. Work on their strengths.
Yes.
Focus on their strengths. And when you combine, this person loves to do the data, this person hates to do the data. Okay, let's put the person who loves it doing it. And let's the person that hates it doing what they love. And then all of a sudden, you've got your best team. So you know who your people are, number one. Understand what they love, number two. And then combine your teams for effectiveness. And if it's not the most effective team, change it up.
Yeah.
Find a way and pose it in a way that is a win-win for everybody. Because people love to come to work if it's something they enjoy.
Well, and this piece that you already mentioned about, wanting to make an impact at their work, wanting to, improve things, like make things better, not only in the company, but in the world. Like, who doesn't want that? And if you read books like Jim Collins' Good to Great, right, about businesses that really achieve greatness, they spend a lot of time on this point that you're making right now, which is getting the right buns in the right seats, right? And this is part of just figuring out what are people good at, what do they like doing, and not putting them in the wrong seat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've probably all been there at one point.
And it's no fun for very long.
For a good day.
No.
And then we find ourselves in seats that we never expected.
Yes.
That just because of what happens, we find ourselves in COVID. We find ourselves teaching from home. We find ourselves in scenarios not traveling and having to use technology to communicate or connecting via Team or Zoom or some other way. And we have to find ways to adjust. And as we've watched the world evolve through this COVID time, people are adjusting. Some very well, some not as well.
Yeah.
And if we pull the teams together effectively, we can help people through that. We can make people have change resilience instead of change avoidance.
Yeah, or change fatigue.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And that's going to come regardless, but we can
You're
help them
right.
be resilient through the fatigue.
True story.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
the thing that is surprisingly refreshing about this conversation that I love and that I think, for anybody listening, whether you're building out your own team, whether you're working with clientele across a variety of generations, to me, what I'm hearing is it's really about getting back to good business fundamentals and being very thoughtful about it. And also having a people first orientation, which we all should be doing. Like, that's the magic of business, is if we can have a people first orientation, whether it's building teams, whether it's working with our clients, we are tuned into who it is we're talking to and their experience to optimize things for our business, to optimize the experience for them. It's a win-win.
it is. It is. And it's just a matter of how you approach it a little differently for each generation to make that connection, which is ultimately the bottom line.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I love that. I know that we've just touched the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. We could go so much deeper, but Karen, for folks that are listening and they're like, oh gosh, I would really love to connect with you and learn more about your work, learn more maybe about your speaking and your, presenting to companies or groups. Where do you like to connect?
People can either connect with our website to see what things we're doing, which would be www.click-consultants.com. And I know you'll provide that separately
Yep.
as well. Or they can email, and they can email me at Karen@clickconsultants.com.
Perfect. And for people listening, we'll provide those links and your contact information in the show notes, which you can find at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. That's, I love that, Karen. And I think that, again, for anybody who has ever faced a challenge in this department, I don't know if you do one-on-one consulting with folks, but I know so many people could benefit from this.
Yes, we do one-on-one. We do small workshops. We do large workshops. We'll do keynotes, any of those combinations based on the need.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, any final thoughts for our listeners, for folks that are listening that are, growing their businesses, that are growing their teams? What final thoughts would you like to leave them with?
I would say that there's 3 things to keep in mind. Whenever you're trying to blend your generations or build an effective team or reach out to effectively to different generations, new clients, you need to consider 3 things. One is communication is critical. You need to talk, communicate, connect in some way. Second is you need to find a common purpose. If you find a common purpose between your generations, you will have everyone all in. And the third thing is, even though we talk about generations and how one generation might react one way over another, I would say, remember that everybody is an individual. So we don't treat everyone exactly the same. We want to consider them as an individual. So communicate, common purpose, and treat everyone really as an individual are 3 things that I would leave you with today.
Well, those are so powerful. The common purpose one I love, because how many of us, and even you just look at what's happening in the world today, like it would serve all of us to be more focused on finding a common purpose, even with people that we have very, very different viewpoints from. And then staying away from generalizations, right? This last point about the fact that we're all individuals, I think that's just so important to remember, and especially in the context of building team, talking with clients, or really exploring the experience of the other person. Thank you. I love those takeaway points. I've so enjoyed connecting with you, Karen. I will look forward to publishing this episode and sharing it with our listeners. And of course, in the meantime, reach out. I hope that we get the chance to reconnect on this topic and go deeper.
I would love to do that.
It'd be really fun. And again, if you're listening, a reminder to go visit the show notes, check out Karen's company. I love it. Check out her consulting company with her son, which I just think is brilliant that you guys work together on this. And you can find those show notes at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Thank you, Karen. Take care of yourself. Good luck with all of your online and continued virtual presentations for the time being. And hopefully at some point we get to meet in person.
I would love that, Heather. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
This was wonderful.
Thank you.